Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Sam and Cole podcast presented by Black Creek Outfitters. Great to be with you. Black Creek Outfitters joins us as our initial sponsor, and thanks to Joe Butler and, of course, the Butler family for their support. Black Creek Outfitters is in, you might say it's in the town center, but, of course, it was there before the town center was started. Everything you could possibly need there, and I'd like to go in there and think I could just start on the left and start shopping and just keep going.
I've done that before, actually.
Exactly. Very, very solid local business, and we appreciate Joe's support, and we'll be giving you updates on some specials at Black Creek Outfitters and some things that Joe's got going on as well as the podcast progresses. Call the Players is this week, and every year I've noticed, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, it has a bigger feel. And isn't it kind of a juxtaposition or a contrast that it feels bigger every year, yet it's gotten closer and closer to the Jacksonville community? And I think that that's a part of what makes that. It's beginning to have an identity and consequently more and more recognition as a very significant, if not major, golf tournament.
You know, it's interesting because during the TV broadcast you might see shots of downtown Jacksonville or a sweeping shot of Jacksonville Beach down to Ponte Vedra and the mention Jacksonville. That's been an effort that Matt Rapp and company have really pushed to try to connect Jacksonville to the tournament from a branding standpoint and putting it out there to the world. It's also happening. I was watching live from on
Golf Channel, right?
Which is, by the way, as a guy who cut his teeth in radio and covering live events has always been one of my favorite things about the job, whether it's play-by-play or sideline reporting or storm reporting or what have you. You've done elections and so forth. So covering things as they happen is always a lot of fun. And so when you're on location, there's an added segment to it. And I really like the show, but they're all talking, and I don't know if somebody said, hey, make sure you mention outside of Jacksonville or here in the Jacksonville area or whatever else. But they had a feature on David Duval the other day that talked about not just his win in '99, but the arc of David's career and that year and how tough the course played and so forth. And there's more of an effort, and that's good for Jacksonville on the world stage. But it also, when they bring in the food trucks and Taco Lou and they get Seabest and Purdue office furniture, they have these companies that have such strong local ties. And I think that's such a smart thing to do. Even if I think they got Mellow Mushroom involved at a certain level, but it's not corporate. This is the local Mellow Mushrooms, right? So you find the connections to the Jacksonville community and really plug it in because it is Jacksonville's tournament.
Right.
It is in Ponte Vedra Beach, but nobody says who lives in Jacksonville says I'm going out of town when they're going to Ponte Vedra, right? They're
right.
Ponte Vedra. It's like driving to Manhattan.
Although staying at the Ponte Vedra Club is great.
Oh, it's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah.
And talk about a staycation spot. I mean, that's
right.
We've got several of those.
About as good as it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you. I just wrote an article, and I would encourage anybody listening maybe to read it on news4jax.com. It'll also be on Sam's Sportsline. But I'll give you a little historical perspective there. This is the 33rd year that it's going to be at the stadium course, and of course 5 years prior to that it was at Sawgrass Country Club across the street. But this is, as you mentioned, Matt Rapp and the PGA Tour themselves, this is a new effort to kind of embrace Jacksonville. The whole reason that the PGA Tour is headquartered in Ponte Vedra is because of the size of the volunteer force at the Greater Jacksonville Open and the support of the local community. Guys like Dick Stratton and John Tucker, who created the GJO sitting at Silver's Drugstore up there in Jacks Beach, are the founding fathers of what the PGA Tour has here as their showcase tournament. But when the tour moved over to the stadium course, they somehow decided that this was going to be an entity to itself that was away from Jacksonville. And for a long time, and I remember my friend Vern Lundquist said to me, I had a very difficult time figuring out how to say Ponte Vedra. Mm-hmm. Because they made it very important. The byline it was in the press room. The byline is Ponte Vedra for television and for writers. So you had the tour kind of stiff-arming North Florida to begin with and South Georgia. Secondly, at the time, this was Dean's tournament. And remember, Dean was a contemporary of Nicklaus and Player and Palmer, all who, and he won. He won the U.S. Amateur. He won on tour. All who were getting into the golf building business themselves, building golf courses, who didn't think that the tour should be their competition at the time. So there were a lot of political forces moving around, and writers like Dan Jenkins, who once famously said, TPC sounds like something you sniff, not a place where you go play. It's
that seems so antiquated now. Sam.
I know. That's what I'm saying is that group of players, now that group has moved, has kind of, moved either to the senior tour or into retirement, the new group of players, and I point to when Adam Scott won in 2004, he specifically talked about this tournament as major status because growing up, he watched this tournament on television in Australia and imagined winning it, imagined playing 17, imagined making the putt on 18 to win. So you're right. It is an antiquated thing. And the players, and the thing I've discussed with Matt Rapp is there are so many people who this is the only golf tournament they go to, so they think they're all like this.
Right.
Yeah. But when you go to, and they're all nice in their own right, whether it's Bay Hill or Doral or Hilton Head or Tampa, this is on a whole different scale because it represents what the tour is about, and that is the fun, the party, the corporate underpinning, and certainly the golf and the money that's involved in the game from a competitor standpoint.
And it's remarkable when this leads us right into the conversation that I think you are bound by law to have every year when the Players comes around, this concept of the fifth major. If Tiger Woods never existed, I think this would already be a fifth major. And here's why. You've seen the LPGA already declare that they have 5 majors now.
Right.
How majors are created.
The senior tour, by the way,
has
done the same, right?
It's not that there's a magic to there only being 4 majors. You say, well, the Grand Slam, okay, fine, but then that's obviously there's the 4 connection there with baseball. But there's no magic that there only being 4 majors. There were times where there were fewer than this, and there were times where the Western Open was a major and others, right? So there's no.
By the way, for those of you who don't really follow golf that closely, when Bobby Jones won the Grand Slam was considered the U.S. and British Opens and the U.S. and British Amateurs.
Yeah,
so
before the Masters.
Yeah, before the Masters.
The Masters didn't exist. Bobby hadn't built the course yet. So
right.
So then the Masters comes along and the PGA's there. I think most people, candidly, who most golfers would tell you that this is a bigger deal event than the PGA Championship.
Mm-hmm.
Only because, if for nothing else, the money that's involved. Obviously, with the season-ending Cup Championship, that's added a different wrinkle to it. But standing alone as an event, this is certainly as big, if not bigger, than the PGA. That being said,
well, let me just throw in a little side note here with this wraparound tour season.
Mm-hmm.
This is the 26th event of the year. There's only 15 to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't. It used to signal this kind of the start when it was in March, but now, I mean, it's 2/3 of the way into the season.
Well, yeah, and I'm not sure if that impacts the major. When you start to make a case for it as a major, but you never have to worry about the field here. I mean, you're going to have the top players. Is it 46 out of 50 this year? I believe now is the
right
with
and a couple are hurt.
You got
Tiger and Jason Day.
Tiger and Miguel Angel Jimenez.
And
yes.
Victor Dubuisson, I think, is
so,
the only other one in the top 50 who's not here.
So the point on this is that the reason why I think this is not a major yet is because Tiger is chasing Jack. And if Tiger wasn't chasing Jack, if Tiger never existed or if Tiger had 4 majors or something, I think by this time we would have gotten to that point. That because all of the top players have either won or want to win this event. Phil's won it and Sergio's won it. And,
mm-hmm.
the players who have the highest profile, have won this event traditionally. Although lately it's been some guys who haven't, been building on their career. But because Adam Scott's got to win, and he's now up there in the world golf ranking. If Tiger, the only thing that's holding this thing back from being a major, I think, are two things. One is the tour moving slowly, or not even the tour, it's the golf community moving slowly to change, which is traditionally it has.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, that if all of a sudden we make this a major, well, then Tiger's got to go further to catch Jack. And I think whether they want him to catch Jack or not, people who are invested in this want Tiger to chase Jack. And they want there to be some drama or some possibility. So at some point, at some major, at some British Open or at some Masters or something down the road, this is the year that Tiger goes into Sunday trailing by a stroke with a chance to catch Jack Nicklaus for the all-time majors lead. That story, we've been waiting for that story to come about. And if that story wasn't a part of the sort of the subconsciousness of the golf community, I think we'd already be calling this thing a major.
Excellent point. I will also say that when Tiger Woods talks about practicing a dead hands sand wedge, specifically so he has that shot to hit into 15 at Augusta, it shows you the importance that he places on the tournament. When he won here in 2001, he just happened to be the best player in the field. When he won here last year, part of it had to do with his preparation for the shots that he needed to win at the Players, and he talked about that, whether it's the kind of tight lie chipping that he needed to practice. When Tiger Woods, at the top of the game, acknowledges that he's practicing specific things to try to win this championship, it elevates it to yet another notch.
And when they moved it till after the Masters, that made that possible. When it was before 2 weeks before the Masters,
when players would say, "Oh, this is an excellent preparation to run up for the Masters," I thought Dean Beeman's head would blow off.
Right.
So yeah, I mean it's a great week. It's certainly diverse, and I know some writers this week have focused on that it doesn't favor any particular player, and that's why the people who have won here are such a varied group of different players. But I can tell you, the guy that set the course record, Greg Norman, 1994, shot 24 under. And that seemed to change the perception of that this golf course was easy. Norman was at 24, Zeller was at 20, Jeff Maggart was at 17. The next closest was 13 under, and then everybody else was in single digits. But Greg Norman at the time, remember, 1994, ranked number 1 in the world, and just about by unanimous acclaim, was considered the longest, straightest driver in the history of the game at the time. And that's where this championship is won. A guy who controls a golf ball off the tee, and once you get it in position there, the best players in the world are going to be able to knock it on the green and make birdie.
Yeah,
I think he did that week. I mean, I don't think he missed a fairway. It was unbelievable.
I think you lose this tournament more often with your driver than you win it with it. I mean, that's
ask John Cook. People forget John Cook stood on the 18th tee with a one-shot lead and hit, as he described, a jumbo shrimp hook into the lake there with his driver on 18 to end up finishing second.
All right, so before we move on to the Jaguars and the draft, do you have a pick for this week? Who's your favorite?
I just think Matt Kuchar has played well all year long, has won here, is from, kind of from here, understands the conditions and the varying wind and so on and so forth, clearly is comfortable here, wants to win here again. He told us that early in the week. I think it's hard to discount him, but I don't understand why Zach Johnson or Luke Donald haven't already won here, because it seems to be the perfect golf course for what those guys are, and that is not unbelievably long hitters, but grinders, accurate guys that really hang in there. And if I had to pick 3 guys, those are the 3 names I'd put up. And Sergio's played very well as well.
I'm going to take 3 different names, although I like all of those names. Adam Scott, obviously knows how to win here.
Who wouldn't bother me if he won every week, by the way. He's about the best guy on tour.
Very easy to deal with from a media standpoint, for sure. Yeah. I don't know why Jim Furyk doesn't play better here.
Yeah, boy, isn't that the truth?
And he's been playing very well lately.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put Furyk in there, and boy, I like your Luke Donald pick. That was going to be my third. So I'm going to go another former winner. I'm going to go Henrik Stenson, who looks like he's got his game back a bit.
A little bit better form.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of a long shot there, but I like Donald and I like Kuchar in that pick too. But so those will be my three.
By the way, if you don't follow this stuff, Jim Furyk put a new putter in his bag last week, 38 inches, counterbalanced, and ended up finishing second last week and shot 165 in the final round. So.
Although it was the wedge that was maybe the best shot he made. He holed one out for Eagle on 10 there. So anyhow,
knocked it in.
Let's make the transition now to the NFL draft. We remind you you're listening to the Sam and Cole podcast, brought to you by Black Creek Outfitters, great local company right there in the town center area. I still have my ski gear that I got from them years ago.
Wow.
And wear the shell as a rain jacket as well. So great stuff there from Black Creek. And if you live in the outdoors, if you enjoy the outdoors, it's a must stop and a great long time Jacksonville business. We're very pleased to have them associated with Sam and Cole podcast.
Cole, the NFL draft is in May, and I think it's driving everybody crazy. Maybe the only person who thinks it's okay is Roger Goodell, which is really the only one that counts in that vote. But I do think they'll move it back to April. But nonetheless, it finally comes up Thursday. I think there's this being, and we're recording this Wednesday morning, this being the day before the draft, and the Houston Texans have not begun to negotiate with a single player, clearly signals that they desperately want to move out of that spot.
Yeah.
And because for people who don't follow that closely either, if you decide if you have the number one pick, you're on the clock once the season ends last year, basically, and you can negotiate with anybody. And Bob McNair, the owners, came out last week and said it's clear that Clowney is the best player in the draft. Well, if they really wanted Clowney, then they would already be negotiating with him, and we'd be talking about who the Rams were going to take.
Although one thing to consider, because of the way that the rookie salary cap works now, there's not as much benefit to negotiating right now with the player because
that's true.
They're more or less locked in. So it used to be the benefit was if you could start negotiating, even if you didn't have a deal done yet, you could at least have an idea about, hey, is this a guy we're going to have an issue with signing or not? If it was down to one or two guys rather than just one guy.
Availability, many people say, is the number one thing.
Yeah.
It used to be signability was a very big part of the draft. Absolutely.
And that's a big part of the baseball draft still when you start talking about, who does Scott Boras
Scott Boras?
Yeah. So, but it's not as big a deal now with the rookie salary cap or the rookie wage pool they have. So, I'm not reading as much into that. What I am reading into is that so close to the draft, somebody high up with the Texans organization, the owner, says Clowney's the best player. So the question is, and I asked Dave Caldwell this last week, does he scout other teams in terms of the way that they put out disinformation and misinformation? Do you know which teams are more likely to try to throw a smokescreen, or which guys with teams, or, and he said, well, they kind of have a feel for it, but the Jaguars themselves don't do a lot of that, which so far has been accurate. We haven't really noticed the smoke screening with this regime.
And I liked his answer to you when you asked him, did he learn that from Bill Polian or the guy in Atlanta, Dimitrov? And he said, no, I learned it from my parents.
Yeah. How about that? So, again, here we are. There will be some people who will be listening to this the day of the draft, or maybe hours before the draft, or maybe you're just catching up and you're catching it after the draft, so you can gauge what we think is going to happen. But I think there are a lot of teams in the top 5 that would like to trade back, because this is every year we talk about where are the tiers, where is there a drop off. Sometimes it's a one-player draft from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a 4-player draft. Sometimes it's a 10-player. I think this is a 10-player draft, as we talked about on the last podcast, and something that Dave Caldwell alluded to. I think a lot of those teams in the top 4 or 5 would like to trade back 3 or 4 or 5 spots, get a guy who they still like and feel like it could help them, is not very different in terms of the rankings, and get more picks, because this is considered not only a deep top tier, a deep elite tier, but a deep draft in general through maybe the first 4 rounds.
You know what's interesting is that sometimes because teams have a precipitous drop-off for seemingly no reason, Atlanta, I think, is a good example of that. Team that a lot of people thought would contend for the conference championship and ends up now with the 5th pick, right? I mean, this is a team that won, or wherever they are in there.
Yeah, they may wind up with a 5th pick or more if they move up
Right.
after 8 or something.
So, but I mean, that's a team that won, only won a few games. So, it's not like they're a team that, like the Jaguars, and even the Texans. A lot of people thought the Texans were a contender, and they end up with the number 1 pick, kind of an anomaly because they kind of fell apart under Kubiak, and Schaub kind of imploded a bit. But
Falcons are 6th, by the way.
Okay, 6th pick overall. So, I mean, these are teams that you could legitimately say are still 1 or 2 players away from being contenders again.
Yep.
Whereas teams like the Jaguars and the Browns and the Rams,
Raiders,
the Raiders look like they need a lot of different help. So that's why it's so intriguing, because a team like the Falcons might want to go to the number 1 pick because they may think that Clowney is the linchpin to them getting back to the top tier. So whereas a team like the Jaguars is like, look, we'd love to have Clowney, but geez, we need so many things. We need some more picks, and we'll move back into the top 10. So that's what makes this draft kind of intriguing. Houston sits on the clock and waits for the kind of offers. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars made their pick in the 3rd slot with about 20 seconds to go.
Right. They're going to take all. They're going to hear all.
They're going to wait till everybody in the world calls them, and then it wouldn't be surprising even if Roger Goodell said, "The third pick has been traded."
It's interesting too, because how a trade happens on the clock on draft day is an intriguing study to me. Sometimes you go, oh yeah, that's an obvious deal that's going to happen because these guys have a connection or what have you. But a lot of the time, the relationship doesn't matter when you're on the clock. It may matter, because if you strike it like the Eugene Monroe trade, for instance, which had sort of been bubbling up for a while, according to Dave Caldwell. They'd had some ongoing conversations because he had good relationships with guys in Baltimore. But on the clock, and I'll take you back to the trade that the Jaguars made with the Buccaneers a couple of years ago, and Gene Smith and Mark Dominic knew each other certainly, but it wasn't like they'd worked together. They had both been scouts on the road at about the same time. They both become GMs about the same time, and sometimes that's how it makes a trade. But because the Bucs really wanted Mark Barron from Alabama, and they didn't want to pick him where they were going to pick, so. We can talk about whether it was what the trade wound up being good or bad for anybody, but it certainly that happened basically on draft day. Those calls were started on draft day on that Thursday. So we'll see how many of those kind of calls are made. Thursday afternoon as the Jaguars get set for that 3rd pick.
I still am sticking with if the Jaguars take a quarterback with the 3rd pick overall, it'll be the most surprising thing that's happened with the team in the last 15 years. And, if Clowney's there, they take him. If not, moving back is what they desperately want to do because there's somebody else in the top 10 that they feel like it not only could be a starter but a star. And, I keep hearing Sammy Watkins. But, I thought it was interesting that Jay Glazer, who's an NFL insider for Fox and does have some connections, yesterday was adamant that the Browns will not take Johnny Manziel with the 4th overall pick, which that seemed to be the consensus of so many people.
And it's funny that maybe the reason why people think that's the pick is because they don't have the faith in the Browns to make a safe, measured pick. And again, somebody tweeted to me last night about Manziel. I had said that I was on a radio show in Seattle earlier this week, and they couldn't believe that the Jaguars wouldn't take Manziel at number 3.
Right.
And my point was, listen, I would if you can trade back, or wind up with the 3rd pick and package some other picks to get up to 20, 18, 20, 24. I would take a chance on Manziel at 18, 20, or 24. Just not at number 3. That's just way
I
too
agree.
high for me.
I don't think any of the quarterbacks in this draft are deserving of a top 5 selection, and I think most general managers think that. And as we talked about last time, you can overvalue the quarterback position, but at some point you've got to decide we need more help elsewhere.
All right, we'll close it out with this. Two questions. One, how many quarterbacks will go in the first round? And two, ultimately, who will the Jaguars wind up taking?
There will be 3 quarterbacks taken in the first round: Manziel, Bortles, and eventually Bridgewater, but down near the beginning of the second round.
I actually think Carr will go before Bridgewater.
Do you?
I do, and I think he'll be the third quarterback to go. I'm with you on the number. 3 in the first round. I think Carr will be the third one.
If that's the case, then the Jaguars will get Teddy Bridgewater in the second round.
They might.
And that's who they would go for. And Anthony Barr from UCLA.
Okay, you've been on Barr for quite a while. I don't think he'll wind up at 3, and certainly not at 3. And I don't. Again, who knows on the trades? But I'm gonna have him winding up with Sammy Watkins, because I do think that Jeff Fisher wants a big offensive lineman there at number 2. That's certainly an area of need, and there are a couple of really good ones. I think it's going to be Sammy Watkins for the Jaguars at the number 3 pick.
So you think it's Clowney, Robinson, Watkins?
Yes. Yep.
Right. All right.
That'll do it for the Sam and Cole podcast. We'll have another one for you following the Jaguars pick. We'll coordinate that and get the latest out to you on who the Jaguars go with in the draft, as well as later on after the festivities conclude on Sunday, we will have our Players' Championship wrap up as well. Thanks for tuning in to the Sam and Cole podcast, presented by Black Creek Outfitters. Stop on in, say hi to Joe and the rest of the Butler folks at Black Creek Outfitters, and we appreciate very much them sponsoring the Sam and Cole podcast. Enjoy the draft and enjoy the players.